Hello, friends. On today's episode of the podcast, I'd like to discuss the Sweat Lodge ceremonies that I've been going to this year. I've had quite the experience since January when I first started going to these ceremonies. Through my friend, I met people associated with the Lakota tribe out in Detroit, and every month they host these Sweat Lodge ceremonies to mark the start of the new lunar month. And I was lucky enough to become a part of it. So far, I've done 3 sweat ceremonies, and each one of them have been profound in their own way. I would just like to kind of go over a brief summary of how my experiences were, and maybe even hint at a future video. So let's get started. My first Sweat Lodge took place in January. It was like the start of the new year, and I did not know what I was getting myself into. My friend who had gone to a couple of them beforehand told me about it, and I'm never one to turn down something new. And when I went, I was very overwhelmed by culture shock, as you could say, and it was a good thing. It was a good experience. Everybody there was quite the community. It felt like church should feel like. Anyway, so we get to the site of the ceremony and we help set up the campfire. And inside this campfire are the stones that they use to heat the lodge, or the inipi as they call it, which is basically, it means resurrection in Lakota, and that is exactly the experience you get when you go into these things. So everybody does their prayers beforehand, throws their tobacco into the fire, and after the ceremony leader tells us it's okay to go in, the women file in first and the men come in second. It usually is about 10 to 15, maybe 20 people at the most, and we sit in rows of 2 or 3 around the fire. And what happens is they start bringing in the rocks, and the ceremony leader, he will either go over stories or mythologies of the Lakota, or start singing songs that represent the 4 gates of life, is how he worded it. I hope I'm not slaughtering this. It was quite the experience, because inside the inipi is where all the elements meet. You have the ground, the earth, the rocks, you have the fire, the smoke, and while he's telling you these stories, they add more and more rocks, and it just gets hotter and hotter, and it's harder to pay attention to these stories, but you want to, because you want to learn their mysteries. And as the ceremony goes on, I just found myself kind of hallucinating to an extent, because the very first time I went, I didn't stay throughout the entire ceremony. I didn't make it. I ended up leaving within 40 minutes into the ceremony because it was just too much. But before I got out, our ceremony leader, there was a water pourer who sat outside of the inipi, and he brought water whenever the ceremony leader asked for it, and his name was John. And right before I got out, he asked for John to bring more water into the inipi for him, and for some reason my mind went immediately to the Bible passage of John the Baptist. He baptizes with water, you know what I'm talking about. So I get up after a second of thinking about that, I'm like, wow, that was weird, and I was getting out of the inipi, and as I get out, John the Baptist is standing there, and he goes, "You have been purified." And just the entire time, Bible symbology was going through my head while I was inside. Well, I clapped my hands while we were singing along, and the energy was just being passed around, and I kept getting visions of the tree of life and the breath of air that was breathed into Adam, because the Lakota stories, they do have a similar mythology. Grandfather breath is the reason that we all have life in the Lakota mythology. And I just seen so many similarities between that and Christianity. I had to ask questions. I don't even remember my questions because of how hot it was in there, but I do plan on sitting down with the ceremony leader and talking to him. That was my first experience. My second experience was a little bit lackluster compared to the first. I did enjoy it. I just didn't exactly get what I needed to out of it the second time around. And as I was explained by John the Baptist, he told me that it's not necessarily the heat or the amount of rocks that makes the ceremony intense. It's the group of people that is inside of the inipi, the energy that gets displaced around. Because when you're under that dome, the songs and the chants they sing, all that energy gets reflected off the dome, and I swear it puts you in a trance. Like, it just like kind of vibrates your mind to the point that you're like not necessarily in this plane of reality. Like, for a moment I felt like we were back hundreds of years ago in the plains of South Dakota or something like that. Like, it just, the concept of time doesn't really exist while you're frying your brains out. That was the second time. I didn't necessarily have any like hallucinations or visions exactly, but I did make it through the entire time that time. And so moving on to my third Sweat Lodge ceremony that actually just took place yesterday as of recording. I went with my best friend, and my other friend who introduced me to the Sweat Lodge was there as well. And before everything started, we went over the construction of the Inipi, and the ceremony leader mentioned how in the circle, all the 16 rods that they use to make the dome, they represent the 16 great mysteries within the Lakota of creation. And in the middle of that dome, all the rods, they make an 8-sided star. And my first immediate thought was, wow, this is just like a magic circle, like the medieval witches and shit like that. We got the herbs, we got the songs, we got the chants, the circle, we're singing, we're summoning spirits, as the ceremony leader calls it. You certainly feel like there's spirits in the room. And that was just a very mind-blowing epiphany I had, because I have read King James' Demonology, and in that book he basically takes pagans and tribal people, and he basically just demonizes their practices and their cultures, and he does go into magic circles, King James. And for a while I was in the Inipi, I was like, this is a magic circle. I mean, all the medieval witch like salt circles, I'm thinking that's like a perverted version of these ceremonies. And even the terminology magic circle, like, doesn't that sound like something a 1500s Englishman might call a dome that summons spirits? And you do feel like there's a certain quality of magic to it. That's just all there is to it. Like, magic does exist, and it's been hidden and suppressed. But luckily, people like the Lakota, and probably many more that I hope to meet, they're keeping these practices alive, and they want to spread this medicine to everyone. This is not just a certain tribe's medicine. As the ceremony leader put it, this is everyone's medicine. And I really feel everybody should at least try it once. And during the ceremony, one of the best things is the cedar tea. And while it's very hot in there, they pass around this cold cedar tea. And as you drink this cedar tea, it's almost like a menthol. As it goes down your body, you can feel it cool and warm your body at the same time, and it makes your central nervous system light up like a Christmas tree. I really liked the cedar tea, and luckily they gave me a whole bushel of cedar branches so I can make my own tea at home. But this was just my experiences from my last 3 sweat lodges. I hope to continue to go to these, and I hope to sit down with the ceremony leader soon just so I can ask him some more questions. But if you have any experiences on the Sweat Lodge, comment below.